Welcome to this episode of the Customer-Centric Retailing Podcast, a forum for retail leaders to discuss industry trends, challenges, and opportunities.
This is Anil.
And this is Fabi, and each episode we invite some of the brightest minds in the industry to discuss the future of customer centricity, with topics ranging from the rise of e-commerce to brick-and-mortar operations, to omni-channel technology to retail culture, and how all of these elements come together to create customer-centric retailing. Today, we have with us Kenny Anderson, retail merchandising consultant, startup board advisor, and former SVP of merchandising for top luxury brands Giorgio Armani and Hugo Boss. All right, welcome to the podcast, Kenny. It's a pleasure having you on.
Thanks, Fabiana. I'm happy to be here, and I'm really excited to speak to you guys today.
You know what, Kenny, I always get excited about when I get an opportunity to talk to people who have worked in merchandising. And so I've been really waiting for this conversation. So thanks for being here. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anil. I'm excited as well.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. And there's so much for us to talk to you about, so many topics to pick your brain about. But just to start us off, I was hoping you could just walk us through your career progression thus far and what really attracted you to the retail industry to begin with.
Yeah, no, great question. It's interesting because I kind of fell into the industry. My background is a business background with emphasis on supply chain management. So I studied purchasing, operations, logistics, and I was really interested in the entire product development cycle and getting product into the hands of the consumer from the beginning of its phase all the way into the end. So this was really, really an interesting topic of study for me. And then I came across an individual who actually introduced me to retail. And we're actually still friends today, that person. And so what she explained to me is that retail is such a dynamic industry, and you get to learn and be responsible for a business, which I love. And I also consider myself to be, I say, a split personality merchant. And the reason for that is because I love the analytics of things. I love studying the financials, the application, the numbers components, but then I also really appreciate design and product. So bringing those two elements together for me and retail was like the perfect marriage. And so I stumbled into retail and a department store experience learning as an executive trainee. And then from there, went on to progress, starting in merchandise planning and ultimately transitioning over into buying from Hugo Boss all the way up to Armani. So it's been a really interesting career.
Wow, this is amazing. In fact, what I really get fascinated about is that you have experience that goes back into pure play retail, brick and mortar retail, right? Then from there into all this coming from multi-channel based sales to now what we call about like a truly omni-channel sales, right? Where most of the product discovery is happening online and then customers may or may not walk into the store to buy. What do you think, how is the merchandisers, work day or the way they live, the way they think and work in day to day, how has that evolved over the years? And what do you think how are they, coming up with the new plans? How are they leveraging the technology? I'm sure, like you said, you like analytics. So how are people, using all those power that they have today at their disposal?
It's very interesting because over the years, merchandising as a role has really evolved. Just over the last 10 years, for example, in the past, and it's interesting enough as well that 10 years ago, we were experiencing also difficulties in the economy from a recession standpoint. So here we are again. But nonetheless, back then, I would say the focus as a merchant was more on using history to determine the future. And there was a lot of reference to the past and what worked well in terms of an assortment and things of that nature. But also trend-wise, it was really important to follow trends. And it was whatever was popular, let's say. And now when you fast forward, things are very, very different. If we just talk about from a product standpoint, back then there was really a focus on tailored clothing. The guys were wearing his fun socks, at least to kind of jazz it up, but also he was adding into his suit or his jacket a pocket square, just to add a little bit more personality. And we started to see this evolution with guys at that time. And then for women, it started to move a little bit more into comfort, even with the sneaker, for example. the wedge heel was really popular like 10 years ago. The wedge sneaker, excuse me, the wedge sneaker. And so that was an element to transitioning over to, a really strong sneaker business along with skinny jeans, which really was speaking to more of the casual, sportier elements. And we started to see people experiencing, individuality a bit more. So as a merchant, combined with watching trends and looking at history, there was also, if you move and fast forward till today, it was really about experimenting and opening your mind up to things that maybe you hadn't thought about, and not always completely just looking at the numbers, but more importantly, listening to the customer. They will absolutely tell you what it is that they're looking for. And it was really staying in tune with these customers and trying to get closer to the information that they had available to share with you so that you could respond. And so, as we talk about responding to customer, but then also using technology, the advancement of technology really, really progressed as well. We were able to dig deeper with the information, with the systems that were being implemented, from merchandise assortment planning to leveraging the history to doing predictive analytics to allow for merchants to see, okay, there's something here that you tested from a category standpoint that had a huge spike and you did not necessarily invest heavily into it, but I'm telling you that there's an opportunity here and you might want to go after it. And so I think this is where, as we fast forward till today, it's a combination of things in merchandising and planning and allocation that have become more critical for merchants to listen to and to pay attention to in order to capitalize on opportunities.
So you mean like, the merchants are now able to get a lot of data from the market and they can use that to understand what they are, where they are doing right and where they could, change and improve upon. So are they using a lot of the intelligence provided by these survey different agencies, or is it more of from the social media, or how are they getting their customer inputs? How, when you say listening to your customer, what are the different methods or the strategies retailers have or the merchants have to go get the first-hand information about their customers?
I have always been a big proponent of actually spending significant time in the store. At the early phase of my career, it was always about being behind the desk. Myself and my team, we'd be behind the desk, only looking at the computer and only looking at what we were doing and what we were bringing in with inside a bubble, I would say. But the information, from my point of view, always existed. The best information, that is, always existed inside of the store. So the moment that myself and the team started to transition our time spent, let's say, inside of our own stores, traveling the market, going to different parts of the country, seeing the differences of what customers respond to on the West Coast versus the East Coast versus the South, by spending more time in the store, speaking directly to the sales associates, speaking directly to the clients in a lot of instances. This is how merchants were able to really hone in on what the needs were and not so much paying attention only to the data that they were seeing behind the desk. This was key.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, definitely going in the store and experiencing and maybe talking to the customer and seeing them, how they buy, how they go observe and look at the product and touch and feel in the more in the store and what kind of questions they're asking is definitely a really good strategy to get the first-hand information. And like traveling and going around. Now, the real question is today, what we have is the whole pandemic situation. Traveling is becoming difficult. Less customers are coming to the store. What do you think? How is now what you said, like, being in the store and observing customer behavior, what do you think, how is that going to impact the pandemic, going to impact the strategy that you described about personally going and getting the first hand information?
You know what? Yeah, the pandemic has certainly put a major damper on, retail in general in terms of like how to connect with your customer and how to get that information, right? But, it is about getting back to connectivity, let's say, and, so many creative ways that brands, retailers have managed through the pandemic. Not all of them, as we know, because there were several that were not able to survive. But for the ones that did, they took an opportunity to like do something different and to be more open. If we're talking about, for instance, using FaceTime as an example, a virtual connection there from an appointment standpoint, and saying, look, client, let me walk you around my store. Let me show you what it is that we have. And although you can't come visit us at this time, I certainly can bring something to you in a safe way. And still, because I know you and because I have a relationship with you, I know your size, I know what you like. We can have this experience together virtually, and then I can still meet your needs and still be able to bring you something interesting that we're offering within the collection. And so that's just one example of like some ways that there can be improved connectivity. It really is thinking outside of the box and really really paying attention even more so to those data points and to the analytics. I'll take an example from Good American, which is women's wear denim, for example, and they really put a lot of emphasis and energy behind the more curvier women. And as a result, they were having some difficulties selling the size 14 and 16 in denim. The women were returning them and they were providing a great deal of feedback online about those two sizes not really working for them. And I understand that the CEO was like, oh, okay, well, that's easy. Like size 15, I understand is probably what you're asking for because it's something in the middle. Well, design team, why don't you just create a size 15? They struggled with that. Like, what do you mean? It's not that simple. It's not that easy. We can't just apply that appropriate grading to the size scale. It doesn't quite work like that. Well, why not? So she challenged and brought the sample of individuals in to work with them to say, how can we build this appropriate fit and size for you in order to accommodate your needs? And as a result of building that particular size around them, the size 15 they created, and it ends up now that I think it's their third best selling size. And that's just a result of listening to the client, listening to the consumer, and being able to accommodate them and thinking outside of the box. And so ideas like that, along with the combination of technology and improving that customer experience and really providing more of a connectivity, if it's dropping something off at their home or being able to like deliver it directly in a lot of different ways. That's kind of what you have to do right now. You have to be creative.
I love that example. I think that's such a fantastic example of actually listening to your customers, because I think a lot of retailers, say they listen to their customers, but actually bringing people in and creating a whole new size that doesn't exist and measuring against your customers, that's a new level. And I mean, the words that come to mind from that story is customer centricity, and obviously the title of our podcast is customer centric retailing. So I'm curious, kind of just in your opinion, when you hear customer centricity, what do you think about? What do you think customer centric retailing is right now in the age that we live in? And secondly, how do you think that retailers can really meet customers where they are, regardless of where they are?
Mhm. I think the key is in that example just provided, it's about listening. And you also have to make an extra effort to actually go and get the information. I mean, clients today and consumers today, not only are they very well educated, but they're also quite vocal. If you ever want to know something, just throw it out there as a question and they will give it to you good, bad, or ugly, right? So you have an opportunity to really hone in on what it is that you can do for your clients, what it is that you can do for your customers in a very unique and interesting way. I think it's a combination that's necessary right now of both experience, and we talk a lot about this when it comes to creating an experience, either it be online or in store or whatever method your channel is for actually retailing. But you also have to for sure add a component of technology in there as well. This is really, really key. There are some exciting and really interesting things that are happening in the marketplace, and it would be a shame if you did not take the opportunity to actually explore them. I'll take another example, which is not necessarily in apparel, but if we use Amazon Go, for example, you can literally just walk in to an Amazon Go location, and there is one here in New York. And I'm not promoting, but it's just an interesting example. It's just the fact that you can walk into their space and it picks up on the phone information about you and it recognizes that you're going in there to shop and you just grab things off the shelf and literally walk out the door. There's no line, there's no waiting. There's nothing. It's so simple, it's so easy. Now, who's to say that that can't be something that is eventually applied to retail? You don't want to completely exclude the client experience within a sales associate, but at the same time, it's all about convenience. And everyone wants to have something quick, easy, and simple. And so it's thinking outside of the box that applies to like food and groceries and other elements. But at some point, someone's going to come up with a creative way to offer something similar in that way when it comes to apparel. There's great technology. You have the NRF, conference coming up soon in June, and there is a wealth of information when it comes to technology and different things that implement it in ways, innovative ways that a lot of companies are going to introduce things to us that we never thought about. And I think we have to be on the cusp of exploring them and taking the risk to say, how can I listen to my customer, apply a unique experience, and give them something that they didn't even know that they wanted. And this is, I think, going to be necessary for establishing a better relationship with clients and really giving them something that they can appreciate. Those companies will stick out.
I'm curious what your opinion is, as we talk about modern retail, because some would say right now that there's kind of like a D2C versus wholesale war that's going on. When it comes to retail in general, luxury retail too, many luxury retailers still rely on department stores to get their products into people's hands. They still rely highly on the brick and mortar experience because it is a more luxury experience. So I'm just curious, what do you think that the right balance is for retailers when it comes to online and offline retail? Do you think it has to be a struggle? Do you think it should be mostly online with a little bit of brick and mortar? Are you one of the apocalypse believers and that you think brick and mortar should completely go away? Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And also, it's a very interesting time. You know, I worked for a company that was primarily wholesale for many, many years. And when I left that organization, that percentage had completely switched over to retail. And it was primarily done because brands started to realize, you know, 8, 10, maybe 12 years ago, that they needed to control more of their brand image, that they wanted to be responsible for the experience a bit more directly related to the client, that they could show the client a better example of the assortment that they were really offering and that it wasn't watered down. And for the longest time, as we know, department stores were needed in order to really get your product out there to the mass market. But the experience wasn't the same. And so things started to shift when brands realized that they could actually be more profitable, actually, in some instances, if they were to control more. They could protect their brand, and it's all about protecting heritage these days, especially with luxury brands. And so there started to be this pullback, and wholesale, as a result, has taken some dips in a significant way. Let's think about a couple of examples. If we talk about Burberry, for example, they pulled back. You have Coach that has pulled back from their wholesale business. You have Gucci, which is also pulling back. There's several brands that are starting to recognize this. However, I say all of that to say you do not absolutely need to completely pull back from the wholesale channel because it's another channel. So just like when online was introduced, it's another channel. And so you have to realize that there are multiple ways to get your brand exposed and also to make money, but the balance is the key. So is it going from like 100 to zero? No, or it may not make sense for your particular business, but that may make sense for others. It just depends. I believe in balance, and balance is finding the right mix of DTC so that you have some control. You might want to, if you're an emerging brand and an emerging designer, you may need the partnership of a wholesale channel because they have marketing dollars that you don't have, and they have the ability to get your brand out there to a wider market than you might because of the difficulties with financing. And then there's like, so many different ways to get to your client, and you want to consider them all. It's about finding the balance. It could be a 70-30 split, it could be 50-50, it could be 60-40. You don't know, but you have to play with the levers until you find the right balance that works for you in a profitable standpoint, from an expense standpoint, and also from the standpoint of making sure that people know what your brand is about. And that's not an easy formula, but you have to play with it. And you can't necessarily just turn the faucet on and off on one versus the other.
Yeah, I totally agree with you because, like, at the end of the day, it is about serving your customers the best. It's about, being where your customers are, and if they are coming in and browsing in a departmental store in the, so then you have to be there, right? If it makes sense, you have to be there. At the same time, like you said, if we can strike the right balance and go direct to customer, it also is a great opportunity to learn about your customers, get more information, because exactly, that information that we know about our customer and their changing expectations, their newer buying behaviors, if we learn more and more about it, that information can come back and feed into our merchandising and product development stage, and that's where, we can come and address to our customers' need much better. So really, like you said, it's all about being present where our customers are and making sure that we are striking the right balance. Just D2C only may not make sense for all the brands. At the same time, for sure, I think we can say that still all the brands should have some level of direct to customer presence. In today's day and age, I think it would not be appropriate, would not be right thing to do if you are not direct to customer, at least at to certain extent, if not whole 100%, but at least some percentage of it, and have a plan to grow.
I completely agree with you, Anil. I mean, especially the point where you mentioned it's an opportunity to learn about your customers and meeting them where they're at, because they're going to decide where they would best like to uh, find and experience your brand based on the offering. And then you can make adjustments according to like how they best respond. But I absolutely agree with you in that regard for sure.
To pivot a little bit, I did want to ask you about your perspective on the experience that luxury retailers have had during this pandemic, because I think it's been quite interesting, right? Because their customers are theoretically the ones that are the most price inelastic, right? They shouldn't be hurt very hard by the pandemic, and so the luxury retail space shouldn't have changed very much. And yet, it was hit quite hard, and they really did have to adapt and change. They couldn't hold any of those fashion shows, so they were streaming them online. So I'm just curious what you thought the effect was on the luxury retail space during the pandemic and why you think that they were hit quite hard too.
You know what? That's very interesting because you're totally right. When it comes to luxury, they're known for having like huge amounts of additional funds to be able to support their business and do so many other great, amazing things. But when it comes to this pandemic, for sure, there are some that struggled, absolutely. And I like to boil it down to the fact that they just simply weren't prepared. And, it's difficult because as we know, certain brands are no longer with us because they weren't prepared. Their P&Ls were not healthy. We talk about Barney's, for example. They're no longer. You have Neiman Marcus, for example. They filed for bankruptcy. Just a few examples of a couple of companies that were putting strategies in place to move forward, but clearly not expecting something like this, and also were not prepared. So, in a lot of ways, some companies were caught with their pants down, for lack of a better term. And the thing is that there was an article mentioned in Vogue Business Index, if I'm not mistaken. They did a poll. There were 8,400 people who provided feedback on the online experience for luxury brands. And they were not pleased with the online experience for these luxury brands. And as everything shut down, as we know, online presence was critically important. And so for the brands that actually had one already established, they were able to sustain or at least survive the experience. But for some of the others, they struggled in a great way, and it was quite challenging. But that online experience is so critical and so important, and you really had to get that right. And I think that some of the luxury brands really focused on just making sure that they continue to focus on in-store brick and mortar experiences between sales associate and client, and kind of saying, because we're luxury, because we're exclusive, and our clients don't necessarily shop online, we're not going to focus as much on that part of the business. And that we're just going to focus on the in store experience. And by doing that and not being forward thinking, I believe that it certainly played a factor. Now, you have some companies that just took a very strong stance and said, we'll never put our product and be able to offer it online. Chanel, for example, you can go online to Chanel, but you're not going to be able to purchase anything. And they were very clear in the middle of the pandemic that they're never going to sell apparel and their shoes and bags. Like they're not going to do that. And so they're taking a position. But we're talking about a luxury company. Clearly, they must have a significant amount of funds to be able to survive. So they are able to do that, which is amazing. But at the same time, it's like this trajectory of online presence and omni-channel and e-tailing, it's happening. It's happening fast and it's been moved forward significantly over this past year. And so it would just be, I think, a disservice to loyalists of the brand that are not able to experience it in that way, at least in some kind of a way. And I'm not saying that is the solution for Chanel, but I'm just saying for some of the other brands that are not quite ready, they definitely need to step it up in that area.
Actually, this is interesting, and I've seen this. We all seen that luxury brands are resistant about going online, and like you said, Chanel even decided not to do it at all. But really, I think it's not that hard or it's not that bad either, because online is just one another way of interacting with your customer. So it's not like you would not do it. I mean, it's like if you will pick up a phone call from your customer, then why would you not start communicating with your customer through a web page? Means why would you not do it, right? If you are open to doing a fashion show, and if you are open to sharing videos of those fashion show and photos of those fashion show, then why would you not have similar thing available on the website? In fact, luxury has a really good opportunity where they can take orders from the customers online, get the item delivered to the customer, and give them full opportunity to return it if they don't like it. Means like, hey, you would come in the store and try it out. You cannot come to the store, so let me get this item to you at your home and take a look at it, experience it, and then maybe take time, return it in like 30 days. So really, I cannot accept that as an excuse. Like, because we are luxury, we should not be on online. It's like something that's my personal point of view, but like that's how I see it.
I hear you. I understand. Yeah, brands have to do obviously what they think makes sense. You're talking about one with deep heritage, and so they feel very strongly that that's their position. But I think to your point, it's if we're not going to offer the option for you to purchase it online and it just goes to you, we will bring it to you. We will create a different, more luxurious way to offer this product in a way that is still respectful of the brand and yet at the same time accommodates you as a client. And so it's thinking outside of the box and figuring out the best way to like make that experience seamless from, like you said, and being able to transition and pivot from what was in store to online to maybe some other avenues that we haven't even thought about yet.
As we talk about luxury, I think it's impossible not to at least talk a little bit about sustainability, because it's a very hot, trendy topic right now, and obviously within luxury retail in particular, there's quite a lot of waste because brands can be pretty resistant to discount and do big reductions, and so if that stock doesn't sell, that can be a really big waste. So I'm curious, what strategies do you think are available to retailers to kind of combat that waste a little bit and really prioritize sustainability? And I'm curious if you have any thoughts in particular around pre-orders as maybe a means or one of those methods to improve sustainability.
Yeah, you hit on a really interesting point because there is so much waste, in the industry for sure, especially when it comes to luxury brands. So there are a lot of conversations about, reducing this type of waste and going to seasonless collections and reducing the amount of collections. And I think that's quite smart. And when I've implemented those strategies, I improved sell through. We improved dollar performance as well, sales revenue. And, we found that clients, for the most part, because a great item is a great item, it's all about quality and fabrication. And so they will continue to actually buy the same items all over and over and over again, repeatedly. And so and you can introduce the newness, you can introduce more of the trends, but it can be done in a smaller way. And so when it comes to pre-order, I think this is something that is very, very interesting. And I think there's great potential behind this because you're literally ordering something and you're tapping into the world of customization for one, So you're allowing that customer to come in and to be able to make a selection of things that they want within that moment. And it doesn't have to go through the entire process of a merchant team, for example, forecasting a total huge amount of units without actually really knowing what the customer is going to do. You have some history, but you're not really sure. And so you're projecting all of these large units and you're submitting them into headquarters and the production and manufacturing facilities with the hopes that you will get the sell through that you need, and with the hopes that the clients will respond accordingly. But that's not always the case. And so with pre-order, you being able to identify this customer says, I want these items in these sizes, and then to go and produce it exactly as they have requested, you eliminate the waste. You eliminate all these other challenges of difficulty of like having excess inventory. You reduce the markdown cadence as well because you don't have to deal with that. And sure, there are other challenges like they have to wait lead time wise for that item to be produced, but there's some innovative things that are happening to actually cut down on that. And so when it comes to pre-order, there's certainly something there for being able to tap into what the consumers want in that moment and produce it exactly to their request. And the brands that are able to do that, and most of them are, I'm learning, are more like emerging brands that are smaller, for instance, and they can react in that way. They're finding that they're able to connect more with their clients. They have better relationships with them as well. And those clients end up being more loyal. I will share an example because this was something that actually happened at my time with one of my companies. I was in Europe and we had a top client who we invited to come and shop with us immediately after the collection was shown. So it was an opportunity to come into the showroom. We had a full spread. We laid it out for her and we showed her everything and we had models there so she could see what it looked like on. And she was able to make her selection right there and then in that moment. And by doing so, spending a few hours, it was like half a day roughly, maybe closer to like a full day, depends. But she ended up spending roughly $250,000 with us that day on the items that she selected. And just making that an experience, being able to do that, and actually knowing that she would get those items well before they were produced for the stores, develop that personal relationship. We established someone that would be loyal to the brand. She had a great experience. We learned more about her. There was more connectivity, and everyone was happy at the end of the day. So there's something for sure to that. And so the idea is how do we figure out a way to do more of that on a grander scale? And when I spent some time digging into this subject, there are some brands out there that are using printing, for example, where a designer will create a design and work with that client, create the design, submit it into a system, printing system, produce it, and actually have that at the door of the client within the week. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of really being forward thinking. And there are some ideas that are happening out there already that I think are pretty exciting.
So, Kenny, on the same lines, do you think showrooming is another strategy that could work for a retailer, particularly when, you want to not produce so much, which also means that you will not have enough inventory of every style, everything, every, product that you are producing at all these stores, right? So instead of producing so much just so that you can have enough quantity, enough inventory of every item that you have produced in the store. What if the retailers adopt the strategy of having showrooming where customers can come look at the product, see it, and have a conversation, whatever they want to do, and make their choice, and then place an order, and the order was later on fulfilled in like a day or two or three, and get the item to the customer. What that would do is essentially still give the retailer, the customer, the experience of the physical retail, the retail where you go into the store and work with the associate and experience the product. At the same time, what we can save on is the extra inventory that we have to produce just so that we can have enough in all these stores, because that's another reason why we end up being hanging on to so much extra inventory at the end of the season. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting concept. So when it comes to that particular concept, I definitely think that there's something there. However, what I will add is that when it comes to what clients are looking for, they're all about convenience and they're all about immediate gratification. And so, as great as that item is in terms of being able to like manage inventory levels and to cut down on cost of sampling and things of that nature for the company, at the end of the day, the customer is going to drive what it is and how they respond. I think that you will have a significant amount of clients who will really appreciate being able to do that and know that they don't have to carry bags, for example, that they can like walk out and know that something's going to be delivered directly to their home. But at the same time, you have clients who literally walk into a store environment because they're looking to walk away from that with something, because there is the gratification that comes with the shopping experience. It's going with your friends, it's hanging out, and having lunch, and then going into the stores and being able to peruse and touch and try things on in the fitting room. So you're now talking about maybe eliminating that experience, and because it's like community based and a lot of individuals like to go and have that community based shopping experience, removing that brings a different element to it that I think is interesting. And so, like most things, I think you have to introduce balance to something like that. Maybe instead of like all of your stores offering a service like that, you sample it. You put it on the West Coast, you put one in the South, you put one on the East Coast, and you see what the response is like to see what kind of traction you can get from that. But immediate gratification is something that's never going away. People don't like to wait. So I think you have to kind of play around with that idea. But there's definitely something smart about that when it comes to the company, the organization being able to manage it and still be able to deliver a great product direct to the door of the client.
I completely agree. I think at the end of the day, there's no one size fits all solution. So no store design is going to work for everybody, and you really do have to see what your customers prefer from you. The last question I wanted to ask you was actually about an article that you recently shared on LinkedIn from, I believe it was the Wall Street Journal, and you talked about, or rather, the article talked about how millennials are actually not the primary demographic for designer retailers because older generations have a lot more spending money. And I'm curious, why did this article pique your interest? It definitely piqued mine. And how do you think retailers should kind of approach determining who they really want to target and who they really want like wearing their product?
Yeah, this article really stuck out to me. I was referencing millennials and Gucci, I think, in particular, in regards to, millennials are not the only one who like to shop with Gucci, but there has been over the last several years this focus on millennials in luxury, targeting millennials pretty much in everything and saying, look, we need to go after this particular demographic because they are the ones driving everything. And it was interesting to me to read that because in my own career, that's been like a top focus and a very big conversation. But at the end of the day, to be perfectly honest with you, in my luxury experience, my top clients were not millennials. And that's just a fact. They just weren't. And the reason for that is because they didn't have as high of a disposable income. My top clients were baby boomers and Generation X, and they just had the money and they were driving the bulk and the majority of our business. And when you really dig down into it, millennials, although certainly are a driving force in the country, for the most part, they are burdened with the fact that although they spend a significant amount of money on online shopping, they also have a significant amount of debt, college debt, because the experience of paying for their education is so much more higher now than it was 15, 20 years ago that they're also not necessarily spending money on even buying homes as much as, Generation X and baby boomers were back then. So the disposable income, when you look at the facts, baby boomers have 12 times more disposable income than millennials, and Generation X has 6 times more disposable income than millennials. It doesn't mean that you can't focus on millennials because right now they're right around the age of turning 40, and so they are walking into a very critical time in their life where they're about to really generate some significant income and will get to the point of having more disposable money available. However, the majority of the individuals that are spending are not them. And so I think it's super important to remember that it's important from a brand standpoint to always, I like to use the 80-20 rule. You know, the majority of your business comes from 20%, of the target demographic. And in this case, I like to say always that it's important to inspire the new customers, but retain the existing ones. And so, whatever is driving your business, you need to make sure that that's where your focus is on. And then you always leave room to do some other things to inspire and to encourage and to attract new clients into your brand. And so this is something that I found super interesting with that article, and it resonated with me in particular because it's been something that I've been talking about in my career with my colleagues for a long time, and I just see it a different way.
Yeah, I found it really interesting for a similar reason because I think, with Instagram and all of these apps, these luxury retailers are really catering to a really young audience now. And while that's great, their customer is typically a little bit older because they come with a high price tag. So the teens can't really afford it. So I think it's just an interesting, shift that has occurred. And so it'll be interesting to see how it continues to progress. But I think we can leave it there for this episode. We want to thank you so much for joining us today, and we always like to wrap up our episodes with our guest telling our audience what's on the horizon for you and how our audience can best keep up with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, this year has been super interesting. So it's been a great year for exploring different opportunities in terms of just what's going on in the digital space and, you know, being a board advisor for Pace University's design thinking program and also consulting and advising a startup company and even helping my wife with her startup company as well, which is an interior design, Apex Home Interiors. And so it's been really interesting to kind of like really explore and play in these different fields. For me personally, I'm going to be continuing to like work with these different opportunities that I have, and I welcome the opportunity for anyone to reach out to me on LinkedIn, where you can find me if you want to speak more about merchandising or retail planning or visual merchandising or anything like that. That's where you can find me for sure.
Excellent. Well, we definitely recommend to our audience to reach out to you on LinkedIn. You post some really interesting stuff. And we also encourage our audience to check out Apex Homes as well to see what's going on there. But thank you so much for your time today and for being a guest on our podcast.
Thank you so much, Fabiana and Neil. I appreciate it. This was great just having this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being there. It was really fun. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Same here. Take care. Have a good day.
That's it for this episode of the Customer Centric Retailing Podcast featuring our special guest, Kenny Anderson. Kenny truly believes that you have to meet your customers where they are and cater to their needs, and that can only be achieved by paying attention to behaviors and discourse. Merchandising has and must evolve in order to keep up with modern supply chains, customer expectations, and concerns about sustainability. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Please rate and review and recommend to a friend or fellow retail fanatic. This podcast is brought to you by Hot Wax Commerce.